All right, let's dive into workplace disputes in Australia today. We've got some excerpts from Workplace Dispute Resolution Methods and a case study about Telstra. So imagine you're at work and a disagreement pops up, can't be solved over coffee. What next?
Well, Australian labor law actually has a roadmap for that. Both enterprise agreements and modern awards require dispute resolution processes.
So even if a workplace has a good vibe, these formal procedures are there like a safety net. What exactly are enterprise agreements and modern awards?
Yeah, think of modern awards as the baseline for employee rights in an industry. They cover wages, working hours, and yes, dispute resolution. Enterprise agreements are negotiated directly between employers and employees, often with unions involved. They can offer better conditions than the award.
Okay, got it. So if a disagreement comes up, what's the first step? Two people just talking it out.
Exactly. Starts with negotiation. It's the most informal approach. Just like our source material shows, direct communication, finding common ground. And a key thing is that a workplace culture of open communication helps negotiation be successful. That's where the positive vibe is important.
Right, makes sense. Telstra seems to be a good example of this, right? They actively engage with unions and seem to be big on negotiation.
They are. Telstra is known for engaging with unions and emphasizing negotiation, particularly before they make big changes. They actually have a history of working closely with three main unions, the CPU, the CPSU, and Professionals Australia. These unions represent a large portion of their workforce, and Telstra really does take their input seriously.
So it's not just about saying they work with unions, but actually listening and collaborating with them. But what happens when those initial talks don't work?
Then things escalate internally. Most modern awards lay out a process for this. You have an issue, you talk to your supervisor. If that doesn't work, you take it up with a more senior manager. So it's basically moving up the ladder, hoping to find a resolution within the company.
Like giving the company a chance to fix it internally before going outside.
Exactly. Keep things in-house. Maintain some control over the process. But of course, there are times when even going up the chain of command doesn't resolve things. Then what?
I'm curious now. Doesn't go straight to a courtroom, does it? There have to be other options, right?
Well, not necessarily. That's where mediation comes in. A neutral third party. They come in to help facilitate a more structured conversation. They don't make decisions themselves. They act as a guide, help the parties come to a solution themselves.
So it's like having a referee. Keeps things fair, but doesn't decide the winner.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
The mediator helps both sides communicate better, understand each other's perspectives, and hopefully reach a solution they both agree on.
Mm.
And it's really helpful in workplaces because it can help preserve those working relationships, which is, so important.
Yeah, I can see how keeping things amicable is key, especially if you're going to keep working with these people. But is there anything about mediation that could be a drawback?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is that the outcome of mediation isn't always legally binding. So unless it's written into a contract, there's a chance one party might not stick to what they agreed to.
So it really depends on a good faith effort from everyone involved, a genuine desire to find a solution that works. What happens when even mediation doesn't work?
Then things might move to arbitration, a more formal process. In Australia, this often involves the Fair Work Commission. They hear both sides and make a binding decision. Both parties have to follow it legally.
So like having a judge in a courtroom making the final call.
Exactly. Mediation is all about finding common ground. But arbitration is about having an expert look at everything and make a ruling. It gives a definite resolution, but one side might end up feeling unhappy if they don't like the decision.
It's interesting how each method balances different things, from preserving those relationships to making sure there's a clear resolution. Speaking of the Fair Work Commission, they seem to play a big role. Can you tell us more about what they do?
Absolutely. The Fair Work Commission, huge part of workplace relations here. They can provide guidance, help resolve disputes through conciliation, and sometimes arbitration. Conciliation, it's more informal, focused on helping parties reach a compromise. Arbitration at the commission, it's a bit more formal, like a mini court hearing. You have evidence and witnesses.
So if you're trying to resolve a workplace dispute, the Fair Work Commission is the place to go. It sounds like they offer a pretty clear path.
They are. And, it's important for employees to know their rights. Don't hesitate to reach out to them if you're facing a dispute at work. They're there to help.
Good to know. So we've talked about negotiation, mediation, arbitration, even touched on the Fair Work Commission. This has been helpful. What about those cases where even the Fair Work Commission isn't the final word? Can it go to an actual court?
You're right. While the Fair Work Commission handles a lot of workplace disputes, there's still the option of taking legal action going through the courts. It's usually called common law action, and it's typically a last resort.
Yeah, I can see why that would be the least desirable option. Going to court sounds expensive, takes a long time, and probably puts a lot of strain on workplace relationships.
Exactly. Common law action is usually for situations where someone's seeking damages or claiming a breach of contract. Most businesses, they want to maintain good relationships, especially with their employees, so they try to avoid court whenever possible.
This has been a really good overview. We've covered everything from those casual talks to potentially ending up in court. Australia seems to have a pretty thorough system for dealing with workplace disputes. It's good to know there are options for different situations.
It's all about having that roadmap. But having a system and using it well, they're two different things. The key is to build a workplace culture that values open communication and encourages resolving issues early on.
So it's not just about having a process in place, but about making people feel comfortable speaking up and addressing problems before they become huge. But what about those everyday disagreements that don't reach that formal dispute resolution stage? How do those impact the workplace?
That's a great point. Those informal conflicts, the ones that don't lead to a formal complaint, they can be really sneaky. They can erode trust slowly and build up this tension that affects the whole team's morale and productivity.
It's like a slow leak that drains the energy from everyone, even if there's no big explosion.
Exactly. And they often fly under the radar outside those formal procedures, so they can be hard to see and address.
So even though they're not official disputes, they can still do a lot of damage if you don't deal with them.
Oh, absolutely. Conflicts, even small ones, if they're not resolved, they can grow over time. They impact not just the people involved, but the whole team.
Okay, so these smaller conflicts matter. But if they're not reaching mediation or arbitration, how do you even start dealing with them?
It starts with awareness, paying attention to the team dynamics, noticing if communication patterns change or if morale seems lower. That could be the first sign that something's not right.
So being tuned in to those subtle cues, those unspoken things that might be going on.
Exactly. And once you sense that something's off, the next step is to encourage open and honest communication. Create a space where people feel safe to talk about their concerns, even if they seem small.
So making it clear that it's okay to bring up those small issues before they become big problems. But that sounds challenging for leaders. How do you create that kind of workplace?
It is a challenge for leaders. It's about creating a culture where vulnerability and constructive feedback are good things, not weaknesses. A place where people can have those tough conversations, but respectfully, knowing that they'll be heard.
So it's almost like preventing conflicts, dealing with disagreements before they escalate. Switching gears a bit, I'm curious about Telstra. You mentioned they actively engage with unions and prioritize negotiation. Can you give some specific examples of how they do that?
Absolutely. Telstra is a great example of a company that's really committed to building a collaborative and positive workplace. They have a long history of working with unions and getting employees involved in decisions, especially when it comes to big changes.
Interesting. What are some specific things they do to make sure everyone's voice is heard?
One of their main things is this commitment to negotiating with staff before making big changes. They know those decisions affect employees' lives. They see this engagement as a way to build trust and avoid conflict later on.
Makes sense. If people feel like they're part of the process, they're more likely to be okay with changes, even if it's not exactly what they wanted.
Oh, got it. And they have formal systems for this. Regular meetings with the unions representing employees, they really listen to the feedback they get.
So it's not just a policy on paper, it's about actually doing it, creating real opportunities for dialogue.
Exactly. And they don't avoid those tough conversations either. For example, back in 2021, they were considering a major legal restructure. They held over 15 formal consultations with unions and employees. They knew the changes would affect people's jobs. They wanted to make sure everyone had a chance to speak up.
Wow, that's impressive. It sounds like they're really committed to being transparent, making sure everyone feels heard, even when things are complex and maybe a bit sensitive.
Yes, and this proactive approach has helped them build strong relationships with their employees. They've minimized those really disruptive conflicts. By being upfront, involving everyone, they've been able to address concerns directly and find solutions that work for everyone.
That's a great example of how investing in that collaborative approach can be good for both the company and the employees. A win-win.
It is. It shows how important leadership is. Leadership that's committed to open communication and mutual respect.
It seems like Telstra really gets it. Happy and engaged employees, that's essential for a company to succeed.
Absolutely. And their approach has shown real results. They have a much lower rate of industrial disputes than other companies in their industry, and they consistently score high in employee satisfaction surveys.
Wow, that's impressive. They're definitely doing something right. I am curious, though. Are there any downsides to this approach? Could it give unions too much power or slow down decision-making?
That's a valid question. It's definitely something they have to watch out for. But they've managed to find a good balance. They make sure both the company's interests and the employees' interests are considered. They have a clear process for making decisions. They're not afraid to make the tough calls, even if it means not everyone's going to be happy with the outcome.
So it's about finding that middle ground, getting input from everyone, but also being able to make the decisions that are best for the whole organization.
Exactly. And it's an ongoing process. They're always trying to improve their approach based on feedback from their employees, unions, and everyone involved.
It's great to see a company that's always working to get better, adapting to what their employees need. It's great to see that. This whole deep dive into workplace dispute resolution in Australia, it's been really interesting. We've covered the different methods, talked about the Fair Work Commission, and even seen how a company like Telstra puts these ideas into practice. But before we finish up, I want to go back to something we were discussing earlier about the human side of things. We talked about how important it is for employers to support employees going through tough times, but what about us as colleagues? How can we support coworkers who might be dealing with a conflict at work?
That is so important. It's easy to focus on the procedures, the legal side of things, but these conflicts, they really affect people's lives at work and outside of work too.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the process and forget that real people are going through this, dealing with real emotions.
Exactly. So as colleagues, we can start by just being there for them, creating a safe space where they can talk, listen without judgment, offer some encouraging words, or just let them know you're there for them.
Just showing that we care, that we're there for them, that can make a big difference, even if we can't actually solve the problem for them.
Definitely. Sometimes just knowing that someone cares, that they're not alone, that can make them feel so much better, more supported.
It's a good reminder that we all have the ability to make a difference for each other, even if it's just in small ways.
We do. And there are other ways to help too, besides just listening. Maybe offer to help with their work if they're feeling overwhelmed. Or help them connect with some resources like an employee assistance program or some mediation services.
So it's about being proactive, finding ways to help them out, both emotionally and practically.
Exactly. And remember, even small things can make a difference. Checking in with them, getting them a coffee, or just saying something encouraging. It all helps.
That's a great point to end on. If we can build that culture of support, of empathy in the workplace, we create a better environment for everyone. So as we wrap up our deep dive today, we encourage all of you listening to not only understand those formal ways to resolve workplace disputes, but also to pay attention to those everyday interactions, those smaller conflicts that might be brewing under the surface. By encouraging open communication, by practicing empathy, by addressing disagreements head on, we can create a more positive and productive work environment for everyone.
You know, a truly harmonious workplace. It's not one without any conflict at all. It's one where conflict is handled well, respectfully.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep those conversations going.